Morning, everyone. Roger Harrobin there, a man who describes a broken bone in his neck as a minor inconvenience. Now, there is a real journalist. So I've been running, actually 11 years, I guess, but who's counting? I've been running Energy Storage News for. I know we're running a little bit over time, as is, pretty much the want with these events. So I'm going to keep things moving on. But yeah, as I say, we've been running the site since 2014. When a 10 megawatt hour battery was a really big battery. It was a year after Germany introduced its first lithium-ion residential battery storage subsidy scheme. I think in both cases, I think expectations are, more than 10 times over in growth. But yeah, so I'm going to bring up the panelists in a second, but I do want to draw your attention to the fact that, as Roger says, we are here to ask, not me anything, but our expert panelists. So you can get on the Slido app, go to plenary session, and there should be the function for you to input your questions into there. But yeah, allow me to introduce our panelists for today. And we have, I do really know them. Paola Travesso from Gore Street Capital. Welcome onto the stage, Paola. Marek Kubik from NEOM. Eric Stromsoe from BWESS. Daniel Burrows from EQ Energy. And last but not least, Luke Gibson with Field Energy. Just a quick round of applause to get everyone warmed up, please, if we could. Fantastic. Thanks so much. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Okay, great. So, before or as the questions start piling in, we're going to turn over to the panelists for an introduction, brief introduction, and an icebreaker question, which, let's be honest, they have had time to prepare a little bit for, I guess. So obviously introduction to yourselves, your companies, your role, and kind of your outlook on the energy storage market. But also, what's one big energy storage trend that you've observed or that you think will become apparent in the near future that you want to draw people's attention to? So starting from my left here, Paola, if you'd like to go first. Yeah.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, everyone. So my name is Paola Travesso. I work for Gore Street Capital. We've been managing a portfolio of energy storage since 2016 when I joined. We kicked off managing a 6 megawatt, which I actually think that when we energized, you had a piece on it. It was a big deal. Now the portfolio is 1.2 gigawatts. We manage assets in GB, in California, Texas, Ireland, and Germany as well. One exciting trend for storage, which we've been seeing, and I do think it will be more evident throughout the next couple of years, is the difference between the strategies that an asset owner can really adopt. I think back in the days when we kicked off, you would expect infrastructure investors to be looking at some of the more sort of traditional drivers. What's your leverage appetite? When do you want to get involved? Is this at construction stage, operational? More sort of, are you a buy and hold? Are you sort of looking to flip assets? But within storage, this is such a complex asset class that the range of possibilities really increase. The conversation is around duration and how you're minimizing capex. What do you want to do with your revenue? And it can go from the sort of surface of, do you want contracted income, do you want merchant? But it can go as deep as, do you want your own trading house that really takes advantage of this bi-directional aspect of storage? Or do you want to outsource to a sort of a larger trading desk as well? Or what do you want to do with your warranties? What do you want to do with your sort of EPC contract? Do you want to go as deep as taking that owner's engineering sort of scope of work? Or are you sort of fully delegating? There's so much you can do between being a passive and an active investor that today being a portfolio manager of energy storage can mean a number of different things for your investment thesis. Excellent.
Thanks very much, Paola. Move along to you, Marek.
Thanks, Andy. So, morning, everyone. So Marek Kubik, for those of you who don't know me, I've been coming to the event for about 10 years, I think. I started with the 10 megawatt battery you're mentioning, so on the development side, worked on the technology provider side for a number of years, and now I'm out in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia at NEOM. So NEOM, world's largest sustainable infrastructure project, and Enowa is the energy and water company part of that, so building a 100% renewable power grid, running predominantly on wind, solar, and then flexible technologies. Batteries are a large part of that, but of course other energy storage is required as well. The reason I mention a little bit of the background and journey that I've been on is, in terms of the Ask Me Anything, I'm pretty happy to go on any of those topics. I really like the use case topics. I think those are really interesting, how energy storage is evolving, what kind of applications you can address, particularly on the network side, which I don't think has been largely touched upon in most parts of the world. We're just starting to scrape the opportunity of how energy storage can optimize transmission and distribution. But also on the technology side, I'm a huge battery nerd. I love the everything from the chemistry side of things and how that's evolving, to seeing cost, performance, density, all these things coming together are leading us very close to the Holy Grail. I don't know, Andy, if you remember, we had the conversation back in Intersol, I think 2017. It was something around something about silver bullets.
That's right, yeah. So we said, because there was a lot of, let's say, hype at the time in terms of, energy storage as a holy grail or it's a silver bullet solution. So we created a sort of a webinar video which is called Silver Bullets for Werewolf Movies. And maybe not for the market, I guess.
So I want to revisit that. The reason I said that was it. Silver bullets are for werewolf movies, but we are actually moving very close, and NEOM is a great example of it, to the holy grail of large, long-duration energy storage, basically baseload energy shifting, right? Mazda has just announced a 19 gigawatt-hour BESS 5 gigawatt PV project that is essentially acting like a 1 gigawatt baseload nuclear plant or a fossil fuel plant, so delivering the continuous power, but without any, the constraints that you would have with the timelines and everything else building those types of assets. So that's super exciting to me.
Excellent. Exciting trends and energy storage news deep cuts from Marek there. Okay, moving along to you, Eric.
Yes, so I'm Eric Strömsöm. I'm the CEO of BW ESS. I helped start the company back in 2021, so we're a newcomer in that sense. But our first investment was in Penso Power, UK-based developer of what was in 2021 the largest BESS project in Europe, the Minety site. We've since gone on to acquire the rest of Penso Power and integrated that organization. So in that sense, we go back to around 2017 when that company was started. And we have been growing internationally through a partnership strategy. So we have a presence now in 5 different countries, and have been working with local partners in each of those markets as we enter them. And I think that's kind of one of the things that differentiates us the most. We have a fairly large portfolio of batteries, but quite uniquely, we're also present across different geographies. I think in terms of some of the trends that we have seen, the obvious one obviously is scale. Everything is getting bigger. And the other one is speed. Everything is getting faster. So the way the market is developing, and I think that's been the case for a while, it is moving fast. But once you add speed to it, it means that being a smaller developer or a smaller player in this market becomes more challenging, because you need to build projects that have scale. And at the same time, it becomes more challenging for the larger players because you need to be moving with speed. And so we're trying at BW ESS to get the best of both worlds, but I don't think that's going to change.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eric. And over to you, Daniel.
Thank you. Dan Burrows, I'm the CEO of EQ Energy. So at EQ Energy, we're a global energy storage specialist, and our business model is to develop, build, and then actively manage our assets for the long term. So if we have a look at our geographic footprint, we're active here in the UK, Italy, Japan, Australia, and on our way into Germany at the moment. We've created 7 assets so far. 3 of those assets are trading in the market, 2 of those in Australia, 1 here in the UK. Of our 4 projects in construction, actually, we have 2 here in the UK that energised last week. So we're looking forward to getting those assets into the market as well. Within our business model, in addition to the assets we've created so far, we've got a pipeline of just over 50 projects around the world. And what we look to do is be there for our customers. And I suppose linking into the question on some of the biggest themes we see, what what we see is the cost of capital will be the biggest cost of the energy transition. So the mission we have in our business is how do we create energy storage systems that genuinely create the most cost-effective clean energy for our customers. So that's a big focus of ours. And what we look to do is create business models around energy storage that we believe are suitable for infrastructure investors. And if we can do that and access infrastructure capital and create business models that are suitable for project finance and infrastructure capital, that should ultimately allow us to support the energy transition in providing the lowest power prices to our customers. So that's the thing that we're really passionate about. Our company's existed standalone for about 2.5 years, however, was incubated within Macquarie Group for about 5 years now. So we had a great start in coming out of that heritage of being a patient risk manager of 40, 50 years in creating infrastructure assets and working with our customers and partners.
Excellent, thanks very much. And the questions coming rattling in, but yeah, do keep them coming. And last but not least, as I said before, over to you, Luke.
Thank you. I'm Luke Gibson. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Field. Field develop, build and operate grid-scale storage across the UK and Europe. I'm primarily responsible for our international markets. At the moment, that's Italy, Spain, and Germany, outside of UK. I also cover a few other areas, so long-term revenue forecasting, strategy, ESG, and a bit of the operational side as well. I actually joined Field sort of 4 years ago when we were just getting started, so should be able to share some insights of building an IPP from scratch fairly quickly. In terms of the trend, one of the things that's, I think, maybe fairly obvious to lots of people is that obviously the grid connection queue has exploded. But I guess the trend I want to pick up on is the rising barriers to securing grid access. So I think what we're seeing is like system operators are now really seeking to actively manage the queue. You've got grid reform in the UK, you've got hefty grid bonds and auctions in Spain and Portugal. In Germany, you've got a number of DNOs adding additional planning barriers. It feels like getting grid these days is kind of like getting a Glastonbury ticket. You kind of basically need a really meticulous planning, a team that's super fast, and you still need a kind of minor miracle at the moment. It's I think, kind of joking aside, it is kind of a good thing, right? You end up with really high quality projects in the end from very credible counterparties, and I think that's sort of good news for the transition. Looking forward to the questions.
Excellent. Thanks to Luke and all the panelists. I mean, I think there's kind of a diversity on outlook, really, I think. But one thing that's really clear is kind of the enthusiasm and the drive that, people are bringing to this industry. And I think that's really evident in the panel today and also in the questions we're being asked. I'm going to kick off with, actually, we did put out a call for questions in advance as well. So I'm just going to run through one really quickly. So I was asked by Stefan Rohr, who is with battery diagnostics company Twice, who says that they recently conducted a survey and found that a large majority of battery storage operators see performance optimization and availability, meaning revenue, as their top concern at the moment. And given the rising complexity of larger systems, diverse vendors, and global deployments, what concrete strategies are the panelists implementing to address and build high-performing assets and portfolios? And who wants to kick off with that?
I'm happy to go.
Sure.
If you like. So it's something we saw as our business model focuses around creating larger and more sophisticated solutions. We've deliberately been global and specialist. So all we do is create energy storage assets. So creating that environment within the team was critical. And then the global nature with that diversity of thought and taking ideas, relationships from other places has really helped. So the sophistication around active management is really important, but it stems right back through to the development phase. So again, with our business model, we think deeply about the use case, where we are in the network, and how we value stack and create the most value for networks, communities that we can then share. So it's being really deliberate early on. And I think it even starts earlier than that when you go back into development. Supply chains are getting more complex as well. So being able to take risk positions earlier to support your customers and ensure that your system can perform as expected, it does take a lot of focus, a lot of dedication, and a large amount of sophistication and expertise.
Excellent, thanks. Paola, did you want to
I
jump
may
in
be
on that one?
able to add my 2 cents to this. I think, and try not to repeat anything that was said, but with energy storage, it is already proven that active management can be benchmarked. So depending on your strategy, you're going to have total different levels of revenue, right? We do like the merchant nature of the asset class because this is how we manage to get the sort of double-digit return. You can go to a spectrum, which means tolling and obviously have sort of a single digit and looking at a more sort of risk-free sort of level rates of return. We think that the exciting thing about storage is this flexibility, the fact that you can do a number of multiple things within a given 24 hours. And the fact that actually, even if you're playing within trading, you can do different things that an asset owner that's 50 meters away from your assets is doing completely different. So we put specialized people throughout each one of the grids that we're in, but we absolutely diversify our portfolio. Because ultimately, there's so many drivers within energy storage. It's weather conditions, it is power price volatility, obviously. You're talking about install capacity, and if you're sort of going for ancillary services, the depth of that given market and that given contract. There are a number of drivers of which will always be out of your control. So if you're trying to somehow mitigate the overall volatility of portfolio, you want to be exposed to a number of counterparties. And if you're in one given grid, your counterparties will be a handful, right? Your revenue streams, you're not going to have more than 3 to 5 revenue contracts. Within ancillary services, you can have different types of contracts, but ultimately, that's what we're talking about. So for us, we diversify along the way. We do have specialized people and specialized partners in each one of the grids we actually participate. And we do realize that the more you're active and engaged, the faster you're going to be able to actually provide a given service, and therefore you're going to be beating benchmark, essentially.
Okay, yeah, one more then.
If you want more.
Yeah, sure,
Cool.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it's just that from a more technical standpoint, I would say some of the things to look out for, obviously it depends on the actual technology and asset class. With LFP, it has a very flat voltage curve, and one of the biggest things that affects performance availability, for instance, is actually knowing what your state of charge is. Because it sounds very obvious to know what the state of charge of a battery is, but it becomes increasingly inaccurate if you're in this mid-range of the system. So one of the largest things that can actually drive unavailability is the calibration of having to figure out, well, when is my battery full, when is it empty, especially in this midpoint. So addressing that early, it depends really on the use case of how you're using the system. If you're going to cycle it all the way up and all the way down, it's less of a problem. But in frequency regulation market and this sort of more speculative shifting between different use cases and revenues, that one can be really important. Redundancy in design, so for instance, cooling systems often tend to be the largest aspect that will take a system offline, especially in somewhere like the Middle East, where I'm working. There's significant challenges with cooling, with the dust, with things like the salt spray if you're near the sea. So all of those aspects have to be factored into actually how available is your asset going to be and how do you ensure the uptime is high so that you can actually make the revenue, whether it's in a tolling context or in a merchant context.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think the availability question is such an interesting one, and something we're hearing about more and more from the people that we speak to in the market, certainly. Okay, very good. So over to the audience questions. So Dan asks, thank you for your question. Do you think it will become the norm for storage owners to trade their own batteries rather than use a trader slash optimizer? And I think being here in the UK, UK has been, I think it's fair to say, quite pioneering in its application of optimizers, but those optimizers are looking at other markets as well. So yeah, someone like to take this one to kick us off? Yeah, Luke?
Yeah, I can take it. So Field actually do optimize our assets. So maybe sort of 6 months ago now, we went live with our first asset. I think optimizing assets is really hard. It links to the earlier question, which is it is a lot easier to understand some of the availability issues if you are optimizing as well. You're much closer to the actual real life operations. But I think in terms of the question, I think in the end it depends on scale. So at a certain level of scale, it possibly does make sense to optimize your own assets just because of that cost saving of commission. And it depends on how that balances out with how commission may reduce over time with lots of competition in the optimization space. So what you're seeing is some of the funds or PE companies are gradually looking to acquire that expertise at a certain level of scale, and there's other IPPs who are trying to build it up from scratch, but it's kind of not easy to do that. And then on top of that, one of the challenges you have is the lender requirements on this stuff. So you need to meet a certain level of performance for you to be able to optimize your own asset and a lender to be happy with it. So that does create quite strict requirements in terms of performance criteria. So I think it's not just a case of like building an optimizer and you're done. You need to build a really high quality optimizer for it to make sense. Yeah.
Okay. But I guess it's important to have some level of in-house expertise just so you understand what the optimizer is doing. But yeah, sorry, Eric, over to you.
No, I think that's exactly the right point. You really need to understand how to manage your optimizers. And so I don't think that it will become the norm for storage owners to have their own in-house optimization. But I think it will become an absolute requirement that you're able to manage the optimization and to manage how you optimize the revenue streams, not necessarily through day-to-day optimization, but through the combination of different revenue streams, whether it's capacity markets, tolls, optimization, how you pull together a revenue stack for your asset is going to be core for any large-scale owner of batteries. And then I think it depends a lot on which market you're in. In some markets, like the UK, there are a lot of optimizers that are willing to provide really high quality services for a competitive cost. And it makes a lot of sense then to use those as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel in-house necessarily. And then there are other markets where there is not the same level of competition, not the same level of quality, where you might be more incentivized to build something internally. But at the end of the day, I think it's a very complex business already. Just developing and optimizing the operations of the battery, the availability that we just discussed, is complex enough. And so, one needs to take a decision like where do we stop, and then sort of where do we say this is outside of what is our core IP. And for us at least, we've drawn that line before optimization.
Excellent. Okay, and I've just realised that we've actually got 26 questions lined up, and we're only a couple of way in. So let's push on with these. And I'm sure if there are things that you'd like to know more about or discuss in detail, you can obviously speak to the panelists afterwards. Anonymous, thank you for your question. That's presumably someone in the audience and not the organisation. Which players in the market do you see owning more batteries? Is it the investment funds? Is it independent power producers? Is it utilities? I guess that kind of is a function of which market and with what structures you're operating in. But yeah, does someone want to take a quick pass on that? And what the outlook is for those different types of owners or investors?
I can start, and I'll bring to this the MENA sort of context, because it's quite different to the European markets, I think, where there's, let's say, merchant revenue, there's this opportunity to kind of speculatively develop, build, own, and operate assets. In most of the Middle Eastern markets, you have long-term offtake. So these tolling contracts, typically, for wind and solar, it's 20, 25 years. In the case of BESS, it's less common so far. We're starting to see more BESS plus PV or standalone BESS being auctioned. And when you see that model, it's pretty much always an IPP model, or IFP, Independent Flexibility Provider. So this means you're having sort of international developers come in and bid for that long-term offtake. Very long-term contracts, so guaranteed in terms of revenue, low risk, but therefore lower return. So in most of those markets, you'll generally see that model emerge, but it's still relatively uncommon. And I'm kind of curious, the panel, we have quite a lot of diversity of geographic coverage here, where else that is emerging. Because I think it is going to be, certainly in that part of the world, the long-term model. But at the same time, flexibility is needed very fast. And in Saudi Arabia, for instance, there's 9 projects now being built by SEC, which would be a utility, Saudi Electricity Company, largely because of speed. So there's this long-term auction coming to build projects from 2027 onwards, but 9 projects, 2.6 gigawatt hours each. Pause just to emphasize, 2.6 gigawatt hours each, and 9 of these projects being built in the next year, roughly year and a half. So incredible scale and incredible speed. And I think you'll see that combination of when you have the need for speed, usually utilities will build in-house and on balance sheet, but unless they have a direct strategy of wanting to own and operate, it's the flexibility that's really needed. So bringing it back to the UK context, National Grid as a system operator generally wants flexibility as opposed to own and operate the assets, right? So even for services on the network side of things, like the stability pathfinders, those are being contracted to third parties rather than owned in-house.
Right, whereas on the other hand, you have like the grid boosters in Germany would be TSO-owned storage assets for the network. So, yeah, Eric?
Yeah, I think if you want to move with the type of scale that they're doing in Saudi and the Middle East, you definitely need the government, TSOs to step in. It's a little bit like what we've seen in Italy as well, where Terna is taking a very active approach to making sure that they get built out sufficient capacity, and they have the first Maxi auction, which is going to be essentially a 15-year offtake for batteries, pay as bid, sometime later this year, and that is one efficient way of doing it. As an industry, I don't think we can wait around for other governments to do the same, because we don't know whether they will and how long it will take. And so I see it incumbent upon us as well to take the risk capital and drive the change faster. So what we're trying to do generally is to not delay our projects because we're waiting for somebody else to take the risk off our hands by, for instance, providing a toll or providing a 15-year contract, but to develop the best sites out there, which we are comfortable owning and operating in the long run, starting to construct those projects without any undue delay. And then once we have projects under construction, we start worrying about things like potentially putting a toll in place or optimizing the revenue strategy. But frankly, we're comfortable also, and we need to be, if the projects are traded merchant. But by taking that risk, we can move a lot faster. And then what typically happens is that as soon as you have a project under construction, you have a more definitive timeline for when COD is going to happen. You can have a lot more constructive discussions with toll providers. That's also how we ended up signing the toll that we did with Shell last year here in the UK for 7 years. It was not an asset that we planned to toll out. We didn't let that toll discussion delay our FID, but once we had it up and running, we saw that there was an opportunity. We create the revenue stream, which is a lot less volatile, and then we can put less risk capital to work on that investment and recycle our risk capital into other investments. And that way, you speed up the transition, essentially.
Sure. Excellent, thanks. And Daniel, really quick on this one.
Oh, I'll be quick. What we look for is deregulated energy markets where there's a level of liquidity and price signals that incentivize value. So we look for that. And then is there a sophisticated derivative market that people use to hedge their energy market exposure? If you have those two characteristics, we tend to find that for a financial investor or someone of our nature, we can create assets because you're going to expect that you can receive value for the asset you're creating. The other thing we probably see is as thermal generation and carbon-intensive generation retires, a lot of the people that own that generation are actually providing these risk management products today. So what we would expect to see is a reduction of liquidity in that market, and that's what gives us confidence that we expect to see more longer-term contracts in the market to support assets as well.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Daniel. So next question with a little bit of a UK focus, really, I guess, but if you can sort of broaden out the response, then all good. So Joe from Cornwall Insight, thank you very much for your question, asks, how do we incentivize new battery energy storage system capacity given REMA, that's the Review of Electricity Market Arrangements, and connection reform uncertainty, along with oversubscribed revenue streams? Who's going to take that one?
Yeah.
Okay, Luke.
I think without going super detailed into reg policy, I just think the main thing is not to change too much. We've had a period of substantial change in the UK market where, just like the question references, right? We've had REMA, we've had the spatial plan, we've had DESNA's changing. There's been so many changes that have happened. And then you've got these zonal capacity maps. People have been developing projects for the last 4 years, and that moves things around. All of that creates uncertainty for the cost of capital. And then this overhang of sort of zonal pricing also creates further uncertainty. And I think sometimes it's, perfect shouldn't be the enemy of better with this stuff, in that the perfect pricing system is a zonal pricing system, but in the end, like, it takes a long time to arrive there. You need a lot of like legacy IT upgrades in the control room. It's very challenging, and in the end, it's just going to increase the cost of capital at a time when already, there's been a bit of a pickup in gas prices in the best market, but it's been a challenging, I guess, prior to this, challenging 12 months. So I just think it all adds additional uncertainty, even though it's being done with the right intentions. So I think trying to limit more major substantial change.
Okay, so keep some sort of stability in
I think small tweaks over massive substantial changes.
Sure. Okay, Paula?
I'm not sure if there's a need to actually incentivize, because we have to believe that the markets are efficient. And if we go back to fundamentals of sort of energy storage, we all believe there will be a need. There's an increase of intermittency. You're seeing net zero actually now being embedded into EU law as well. That this is coming. And the flexibility of energy storage will be required. So if we believe that the markets will be efficient, that we will play a role into building capacity into the GB market and any other grid. It's a matter of being somehow cyclical. It is much in nature, and therefore we're going to see volatility within revenue in the coming years. And it is hard to predict whether this kind of like downturn time will be a year, 2 years, 5 years. But if we don't see the private sector incentivized in building out capacity, you're going to see an install capacity that will actually not have enough demand for the supply that's coming our way in 2030. And therefore, returns at that point in time will be massive. And then you're going to see a lot of players coming back to the market. So again, I'm not sure there's anything that needs to be done within the short term. If we go back to fundamentals, we need to see that capacity increasing, whether this is going to be next year or whether this is going to be in 5 because of interconnection reforms. That's fine. If you're a long-term investor and you know what you're doing and you have experts on your build-out and revenue management, you should have a portfolio that will be resilient throughout the stages of downturn as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I believe we've got time for a couple more quick questions, or we'll be booted off, I'm sure, when the time comes. So, Anonymous, again, prolific question asker there. What storage technology are you most excited about and why? And I'm going to take a wild leap of assumption that you're all mainly focused on LFP, large-scale battery storage technology at the moment, but just wondering if, if there are other things that you're kind of looking at the moment or might be evaluating within that, if there's anything that's particularly exciting within that gamut, or conversely, maybe you just believe that lithium iron phosphate is what's going to be here for the present, and
Technology questions, my bread and butter.
Yeah.
So, LFP, the thing is there's still such a long way to go in terms of its density, cycle life, performance improvements, that it's a very difficult technology to beat. So even as we look to 2030 onwards in NEOM, we're just starting to see 8 and 10 hour LFP being built. However, there's 2 elements to think about. One is the supply chain, essentially bottlenecks like we saw a couple of years ago. It's unlikely to happen again. I don't have time to get into why, but if it did, right, you need a hedge. Mm-hmm. And then the second is more strategically, what the kingdom is trying to do is set up regional supply chain, and I think that's largely sailed already on the LFP front, but there's opportunities on others. So if I was to pick one of the technology that addresses both the hedge and the localization point, it's probably sodium ion. For the reason that if you can get sodium ion up to a similar cycle life and a similar cost point to LFP, it's very attractive from a number of other reasons, right? The main things that go into a sodium ion battery are sodium, so salt, and you have that as a byproduct of brine, and you don't have an established industry and supply chain around it. So tying it into parts of the world where there's a lot of desalination need, and the byproduct of that is essentially sodium, is really interesting. And from a circularity and supply chain perspective, it offers a really good potential hedge. I kind of think of it as a pressure release valve, right? If the LFP price got to a certain level, that's actually what happened a few years ago. We started to see sodium ion become talked about a lot, and then it kind of fell away as the price came back down.
Phenomenal. Okay, so, Daniel, go for it. Yeah.
The question was one on technology, but I think the broader question is supply chain. So we keep an eye on the horizon, but see LFP as the technology we'll work with. But what we see on LFP is cost down, oversupply in the market, and obviously lithium prices are low. But the other dynamic in the market is balance of plant and credibility of contractors and people on the balance of plant side. So we're seeing inflation really gripping, longer lead times and costs going up on the balance of plant side. So I think that's the big dynamic we're seeing in the supply chain and project delivery.
Okay, so it's not just around the battery cell then. Okay, 40 seconds left. We're going to do one final question. Someone asked, what's Europe's hottest markets for energy storage right now? Over to you.
I can have a go.
have
I
a
think it depends.
one-word answer
I think
each.
it depends
Go on.
who you are and what your target return is, basically. Like if you're looking for contracted fixed revenues, maybe Maxi in Italy is super attractive. If you're looking for high returns and you're interested in like congestion management, maybe Spain's really interesting. Spreads are very high at the moment. It sort of depends what you're after. If you're after a lot of merchant exposure, you've got a massive German intraday market that's really exciting. I think it slightly depends on who your investors are and what their return requirements are, and whether they need contracted revenue or they're happy with more merchant exposure.
Cool.
Almost
go
a
on,
bit
Paolo.
of, repeating that, we're enormously focused in EU. We're actually in the process of raising a EU dedicated fund, and that's exactly what we're looking at. Germany, we already have exposure there. It's incredibly interesting what you can do with your trading desk. Poland, actually, we've seen capacity market contracts a few years back, and now sort of them organizing to have the procurement around ancillary services at a sort of market level as well. The Iberian grid, you already mentioned a lot of interesting things coming our way in that sense as well. So for us, EU, there's a lot happening in terms of capacity. It is growing, and it is in need to grow in a number of those grids. And it is, again, going back to fundamental demand for flexibility. Therefore, this is definitely what we're focusing for the next couple of years.
Fantastic. And I think we are absolutely going to have to call time on it there. But yeah, just want to say thank you so much to our excellent panelists today. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you. And yeah, back over to you, Roger.